It was a chilly November night in Virginia. A friend of mine and myself were engaged in criminal activity at the time. This was a long time ago, back in 2008. It was very cold and wet, like it normally is during November, late fall time in Virginia. We were searching other vehicles that were left open for money and valuable goods, otherwise known as car hopping. The man I brought with me was deaf, but I spoke fluent sign language. I was basically blind without my glasses and didn't bring them with me that night, which I think is part of why we were caught. It was a pretty decent neighborhood, not too rich, with a lot of security systems that concerned neighbors, but not low class either. A bunch of hard-working, careless middle-class people ripe for the taking. At least that was the way my criminal mind looked at it during these thoughtless and careless times in my life. Much better. The neighborhood was nicely organized and very complacent with and surrounded by the nature around it. It had a river that ran through the middle of it. It was full of plenty of places to hide and creep around without being noticed. It was late at night. It didn't take us long before we began to encounter a plethora of unlocked cars and goods. On a certain street, upon exiting a certain area, a group of people were standing together on one of their front porches. I overheard their conversation. They seemed to be concerned neighbors who had discovered they had been stolen from, and they were suspicious of us. They seemed to be pointing to us and commenting, but it could be us, but I couldn't notice too much. I was walking away from these people, trying to look as normal as possible, with adrenaline running through my veins. I couldn't say anything to my friend without making too much of a scene. It was dark, and he was deaf, not even looking in my direction. I would have had to make a big deal to get him to notice me, and to talk to him and sign about the situation we were in, and I didn't want to appear too suspicious to anybody. I was going to wait until we were out of sight and bring the situation with the neighbors to his attention. We approached the main road and out of the neighborhood and began to walk in the direction of a nearby park and passed through the woods into a nearby shopping center, out of place. I suppose I didn't need to say anything to him because he had already gotten the same idea as me without hearing what I had said or what they had said. Right as we were about to reach the street, we were going to turn to head towards the park. A white Crown Victoria came creeping along the main street. My heart sank. It was the worst thing I could imagine. He had a spotlight on and pointed at us. It was a cop. He already knew what we were up to and was onto us. We had the stolen goods on us, and we were screwed. And I told myself in all seriousness that I was out on bond for 3 felonies already, and there's a chance that I can get out of trouble. I'm already in and live a decent life. But if I'm caught right here, I'm going back to jail, and I won't get a bond, and I'll most definitely do time in prison. I quickly made a sharp and daring decision. I took the lead and ran for it, and my friend, whom I know is an exceptionally fast runner, ran with me. I remember running the streets with him when we were younger and how amazingly fast he was. I was always competitive, was able to outdo most others in the area of physical achievement, but there was no competition with this deaf guy. He was like a Navy SEAL, had triathlon endurance and speed. I could barely keep up with him as a kid, and he had no problem outrunning other kids on bikes either. He could run and run for miles and miles without getting tired. I trusted this guy by my side. Not only was he my friend, but he could run faster than most human beings could, even physically fit law enforcement officers, and I didn't have to worry about him getting caught and spilling the beans as we were. I immediately dropped the bag with the stolen goods for the cops to appease them, and so it didn't get in my way. I figured having all the stolen goods stashed right there from the get-go would give them one less reason to chase us. I ran up a house, the narrowest pocket away from the road as possible, and was faced with a 10-foot tall wooden fence. I had never seen such a tall and sturdy fence. I took a steady jump barely reached the top. I had to have my friend give me an extra boost before he jumped up himself and over the other side with me. We were in someone's backyard, and the cops saw us jump back here. I began to sign to my deaf friend. I told him that the cops know where we are hiding. We can't stay here. He told me he wasn't moving. I forewarned him that the cops think we're going to run to the park, and that's where he's going to go now. Look, as soon as he drives past, I'm going to make a run for it, with or without you. He angrily explained to me he was staying put. He seemed to know what he was doing, but it seemed like a very bad idea to me. Even if the police were unwilling to scale the high fences to search every yard for us, they at least knew what yard we were in and exactly where to look. Soon there would be more units. Helicopter. The cops aren't going to just let us go. Sure enough, the cop rounded around the corner of the street and flew around past with his lights on. I waited for him to pass, and out of sight, I emerged from the shadows of the backyard and charged across the street into the shadows of the riverside and back alley fences to the other side. It was dark and full of woods with an adjacent river. I ran across the outer edge of the residents' backyard and the fencing that lined along the shore of the river until I reached a power station. I stopped for a second and listened around, but it was quiet. I had a good view of a busy street, and there seemed to be no activity around me. I knew that behind the passage was a parking lot that led into a somewhat busy area of town. It was dark. The cop hadn't got a good look at us. There was nothing distinguishing about what I was wearing, and I could easily fade into and disappear into the rest of society. And with the fact that stolen goods were no longer in my possession, if I were caught and questioned, I could easily deny that I had anything to do with it. The cop was probably looking for us at the park, and my plan worked, just like I thought it did. I knew this was my ticket to freedom. This river was a threshold between a contained area where I was being hunted in, and the other side, freedom. I felt surges of excitement begin to rush through me as I began to make my way into the passage, but it was flooded and impassable. I went for it anyways, and waded through disgusting water to the other side. And to my shock and dismay, it looked incredibly bright on the other side, much brighter than the parking lot should be, and I knew it. They were waiting for me there. Somehow they knew. I turned and ran before I exposed myself to them, and exposed myself to an area without cover. I ran across the river and heard a female officer yell at me, "It's him! Stop!" I ignored her and rushed to the other side as quickly as possible. When I got to the other side of the power station, I tried to run, but I felt extremely heavy. I felt so heavy that I began to gasp very quickly. So quickly it disturbed me. I needed plenty of energy to run and get away. I may have to run for a very long time, and I had no idea why I was suddenly so tired and so gassed. I quickly came to the conclusion I was soaking wet, and the extra weight of the water had made running extremely difficult. I took my hoodie off and threw it on the ground and felt instantly relieved. I could run again without feeling weighed down this time, without getting tired. I was free again. I wasn't even close to being tired. I flanked around the woods. I was planning on getting around the back shops and to the other, more busier side of the shopping center. Now that I think about it, it was a bad move. But I was just desperate to get away, and I didn't have any better plans. I ran about 300 meters west and tried to approach south of the river again, wading through the disgusting cold water again. Again, it rained heavily, thunder cracked, and bellowed heavily. A heavy, cold November thunderstorm. When I got to the other side, I knew how I would be there. So I immediately waded across the river yet again and realized I'd lost my shoes on the other side. The cops were waiting for me there too. I felt at this point like the cops were almost psychic, like they knew everything I was going to do before I did it. They were experienced at this, professionals, and I was no career criminal. I'd never ran from the cops before. I couldn't describe to you how scared I was, or how doomed I felt. I ran through the woods barefoot as fast as I could. I was only left with jeans and a t-shirt in cold rain. This chase had gone on too long. Too much backup had been called. Soon there would be a helicopter. I had to get to a small, hidden, cozy place that looked like a place no one would look for me. I needed to get to it fast, very fast. I jumped the fence into a backyard. I saw a woman in there with a baby. I beat it on the outer glass. I just wanted to use the phone so I could call for a ride and leave this place in an inconspicuous way. I didn't like the woman's reaction. She was cautious and trustworthy. I could very well look like a desperate person in emergency that needed help, but she got her phone instead and opened the door. I knew she was calling 911. I had to move. My plan on hiding in this area was immediately scrapped. This area was keyed in now because of my foolish action. One foolish action after another. This really didn't seem like it was going to work out very well, but I had to move fast. I jumped from one backyard to the next. I felt a couple times and took a bad fall, and someone's fence gave out, trying to jump over me. The fall made me flip right over and knock the wind out of me, gave me a mild concussion. I raised myself up quick, gained my equilibrium, and went back to jumping over the fences to a two-way clearing. I was back at the original spot we were caught, where we had ran from them, and much to my amazement, there wasn't a cop in sight. It was completely quiet. There were no neighbors outside, or anything. Extremely quiet and dead. I immediately dashed to the other side of the main street through the neighborhood and felt much better on the other side. I was now outside of their known area where I was last seen or heard to be in, and close to a set of woods that merged into the backyards in the woods, into deep woods. Even better, the fences on the other side of the first backyard were low, easily jumpable. There was a shed on the other side. It was nicer, newer shed, made out of wood, windows and everything. A comfortable, dry place to hide. There's no way the cops are going to look in everyone's backyard over this in such a large neighborhood, especially when we had ran the other way. The door was locked, but immediately after giving up on this shed, my eyes rested upon another, smaller shed, directly to the north of that shed in the same backyard. This was an older shed, but it was also locked. I then realized the shed was made out of a thin sheet metal, and I could raise up the locked door and climb in and force the door back shut behind the frame. I did it, and it worked. The door fit right back into the frame easily, like I had never touched it. It was dark inside the shed. There was no windows, and it was also very cold. I heard the sound of a distant chopper and felt my adrenaline return. I knew the police had infrared technology with their helicopters that has thermal imaging. I was unsure as to how well the shed's thin sheet metal's roofs and walls would shield me from this technology. I had to look at everything that could go wrong. I felt exposed, and sure enough, the helicopter began to approach the shed. I was afraid. I felt the cops somehow knew where I was, just like before. The helicopter slowly passed over the shed, and I felt like it lingered there almost forever. But to my relief, it just passed over. It appeared to move north. It was at this point I was very happy. I found the shed. If I had to make a run for it through the woods north, I would have been spotted. I could hear the cops just outside on the main street. What sounded like a dozen of them chatting with each other, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about. I could hear that they were saying, and they sounded very relaxed, almost as if they had given up on chasing me. They were just shooting the shit outside their cars. One of them shined a flashlight on the shed. It went through one of the holes. The cop appeared to be thinking about it for a second. Lost interest. They didn't see where I went. I could see in that shed or anywhere. They couldn't see. They didn't know. And it wasn't worth searching every backyard for me all night, possibly in vain. My last minute planning worked. As time passed by, the cold began to set in, and I covered my legs in my t-shirt and began to breathe into my shirt to warm up my entire body. It somewhat worked, and I waited and waited for a long time. I waited for hours, it felt like, and I waited for the cops to leave. I felt relieved when I heard the sounds of the engine start up and pull away, but I wanted to wait until they were long gone. It was still dark out, and they could still be patrolling the neighborhood or waiting for me. If I were seen in my condition, the owner of the house came out to let his dog out, and I grew nervous again. I didn't want to be discovered in this backyard by this man who would probably call the police and lead them right back to my location. This wasn't my neighborhood I lived in, and it was a bit away on foot, with no shoes and no jacket. It'd be hard to make it home without running into a cop somehow. I could tell it was a small dog by the sound of its little footsteps. I grew very suspicious. I noticed something, began barking. I was as quiet as possible. The owner didn't take it seriously, urged the dog to get back inside. I waited longer, satisfied the owner wasn't alert to my presence. Finally, after an hour or two of the cops seemingly gone, I decided the coast was clear. I left the shed the way I came in and jumped back onto the main street. My main priority was getting home. I knocked on a neighbor's door, and a man answered, looking at me, confused. I told the man that I was partying at a friend's house, got into a disagreement, was jumped by the people in the house, just wanted to use the phone to call for a ride. His reaction was suspicious, but he didn't call the cops. He told me to stay where I was, went inside his house, returned with his phone. He told me I can't come into his house, but I can use his phone. I called my friend and got him to come pick me up. The man emerged from the house a second time, this time with a blanket, apparently feeling bad. He told me I could wait outside his house for my ride. It was no longer raining, but I was afraid the cops would drive by and see me, began questioning me, finding out in my condition that I'm the person that ran from them. They never did get to, though. I felt great relief when my friend's SUV came around the corner, and even greater relief when I got into the warmth and safety of his vehicle. I could now leave this area and go home in an inconspicuous way. When I arrived home, I immediately got online and saw that my deaf friend was signed on with his TTY phone. I asked him where he was, and he told me he was at home. I asked him how he got home, how he got away, where he went. He told me he never left the area. He sat in the back of the house in a chair like he owned the place. He told me they had dogs and everything. I was nevertheless relieved to see he had gotten away. I got a phone call later that day from the detective. I knew he was calling in regards to in the bag of stolen goods I'd left at the scene. So I'd left, and there was my wallet. I told the detectives that I had been meaning to call them, that my friend's car was broken into last night, and that he claims my wallet was stolen out of it, along with some other things too. He didn't inquire into the investigation. To my surprise, politely excused me. He never called me about the wallet. I don't know if he knew I was lying to him, or if he knew he couldn't build a case against me, or he just didn't care if my wallet got back or not. Either way, I was just happy to have gotten away. I had done this stint on several previous occasions with no problem, but this was the last time I ever did this. I'm proud to say this, but I've lived a narrow and straight life for the past 11 years.